Pew, 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 pew.
Hi there. My name is Matt Singer. I'm the arts and culture editor at Willamette Week newspaper, and my guest today is Leather Storrs. Leather is a longtime chef and Portland restaurateur who's kind of reinvented himself in the last few years as a cannabis chef. And he is now the co-host of a new show that's premiering on Netflix this week, which is appropriately called Cooked with Cannabis. Leather, thanks for being here today.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, first, tell me a little bit about kind of what you've been doing in quarantine. What have you been watching, eating, smoking, perhaps, to kind of pass the time?
I've been doing a certain amount of writing, working on some recipes, a book on cannabis, trying to walk and sort of stay active, a lot of cooking, a lot of just kind of hanging out, and yes, quite some content digesting.
What does a cannabis chef eat at home during a pandemic?
I mean, the same thing as everyone else. I mean, I'm certainly spending more time cooking and trying out some different dishes. Got into the sourdough action, but my food is not laced. I'm not perpetually high. So I'm cooking like a cook and less of like a stoner.
Got it. Well, tell me a little bit about Cooked with Cannabis. Kind of give me like the elevator pitch version of the show.
So it is a cooking contest show, very much like a traditional format. 3 chefs competing in 3 rounds for $10,000 with the charge that they need to use. Well, they don't have to use it all, but 8 milligrams of THC and 100 milligrams of CBD are available to them throughout their meal.
You told me we corresponded a bit over the years. We wrote a profile on you in the paper like a year ago, and ever since I've kind of been aware of who you are, I feel like you've been talking about how you had this idea to do a kind of cannabis and cooking themed television show, and I think even as soon as like a year ago, you had said that you've talked to a couple the people who make these decisions at the streaming networks and that kind of thing, and then there was a lot of apprehension that you were running into. So tell me a little bit about this show's journey and how it finally got to Netflix.
Well, I was on a show called Bon Appetit on Vice Network, which was also a cooking contest show, but a little bit more of a parlor game. Lots and lots of milligrams, lots of weed, lots of on-camera smoking, and kind of gags and handicaps, and much more of sort of an entertainment piece. And while I was on that show, which I did not win, I met the director, Michael Rucker, who was directing that program. And I think that he liked my approach, which had more to do with understanding dosage and really being kind of a shepherd for your diners. And for someone who has never been moderate, for someone who's always like, yeah, bring it on, keep it coming. Ironically and strangely, I've had a real sense of responsibility as far as my role as being a guide. I think eating cannabis is so much different than smoking it. And as Snoop Dogg says, it ain't got no off switch. And you or someone has had a bad experience eating cannabis. And so there's a great deal of trepidation around it. There's quite a range of effects. My reaction might be completely different than yours. And so being able to bring a disparate group of people together and guide them through a meal or an experience, I think is a real skill. And because at the end of Bon Appetit, everyone was just kind of glazed and post-apocalyptic and mouth breathing, I was discouraged by that. And I really talked up this idea that, look, this is an ingredient. If we're careful And if we break it down, if we make it a little bit more scientific, a little bit more granular, then much more interesting things will happen than people just being locked into their sofa or having palpitations.
Tell me a bit about how the competitors are incorporating cannabis into their meals, because I think, my sort of perception as somebody who has like basically no experience with cannabis infused food is that when you say cannabis infused food, it means like, oh, you're making some THC infused butter and then you're just making a recipe
Right.
like you normally would. But from the first episode that I watched, there are some really interesting ways in which the cannabis is used, both THC and CBD.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, was there anything that even surprised you?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, somebody made a flour with the combination of wheat flour and actual flour that they use then in a dredge on a kind of a schnitzel variation. Some people blanched and cooked the leaves themselves, which would then not be psychoactive. You wouldn't get any heady effects from that. Some people pureed the greens and then worked them into stuff. One of the added layers of complexity that I really appreciated on this show was that all of the cooks the day before the contest made their own infusions. And I'm a big believer that if you're going to be working in this arena, that you really need to be working with flour. I don't cotton to the chefs who are just, putting a dropper of distillate on top of something and saying, presto, it's infused. I think there needs to be a kind of a thoughtful integration. And we saw that in so many ways, both psychoactive and not.
Tell me a little bit about the logistics of filming a show in which almost everybody on camera is gradually ingesting more and more weed. I mean, you mentioned that Bon Appetit people were just sort of completely wasted by the end of it. This is a little bit more measured out, but I imagine that there has to be some sort of like, it changes the way you film a show, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, for sure. And in fact, there was one episode we did where one of the contestants was a really chuffy young cook. And as I started to get more medicated, I started to sort of project onto him and dislike him more and more because I recognized myself in him. And so it became this kind of singular focus of mine throughout. And I was very interested to see if they would plumb that storyline. The director's like, at a certain point, we need to protect you from yourself. You didn't look great insulting this guy. And so we didn't go that route. But yes, there was an evolution in both people's comfort, in their ease, in their ability to form sentences.
I was going to ask about the judges, which you brought up. I mean, or I guess they're not judges; they're celebrity guests,
right?
Essentially, and I was going to say it's interesting because they're not really judging; they're just kind of there as almost just to give commentary. And I think there's a certain amount of entertainment in just watching them gradually get
exactly
blitzed. So is that kind of the thinking of why they're on?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think when we do a second season, that they may be integrated more. I mean, as it was set up, there was sort of our island, me and Khalees, the bank of the three cooks, and then very separate was this table that they called, regrettably, the best buds. And yeah, they were there for color commentary, and some certainly got loopier than others, and some of them were really into it. Like we had one table of Joe Coy and another comic and a woman named Elle King and Ricky Lake. And towards the end, when they were all pretty high, they did this amazing kind of percussive arrangement of Milkshake, Khalees's song, which just brought the house down. Unfortunately, I think for copyright reasons, they couldn't show that. But there were some good interactions with a lot of the guests.
You had mentioned when we spoke to you for the paper a year ago that when we were talking about sort of your ideas for a TV show, you had really, one thing that you'd kind of really thought about was doing something almost along the lines of like a no reservations, but with viewers. Is that still sort of a dream of yours?
Very much, and I think it's literally click dependent. And if people like the show, and I suppose more importantly, if they like me, and if I resonate with the audience, then I think the production company 25/7 would be much more open to my pitch, which I have made formally and several times. So yeah, I would like to do that. I love the idea of bringing a spotlight to a community and reading the community through the lens of cannabis. So you've got makers and growers and artists and cooks and distillers and bartenders, and all of whom are unified in bringing an event together around cannabis. And then at the event, you would have what I like to call kind of capital letter people from that region who would be talking about the place of cannabis in modern society.
What do you think the effect of this pandemic will be on the cannabis industry as a whole? I don't know if that's something that you have a perspective or thoughts on, but we asked a couple of people who watch the industry about sort of what they feel like is going to be the impact of this. And there is a sense, people don't know anything right now, and it's hard to forecast anything. But if there's one industry that might come out of this maybe better on the other side, it could potentially be cannabis, because right now, it's been deemed essential in so many states, including Oregon.
Right.
And that psychologically, I think, has an impact on how the legislatures and the powers that be,
Right.
what their view is of it. And so, this could actually be a boon potentially for cannabis. Do you have any sort of a perspective on?
I think you're right. And there are a lot of things that are hamstringing cannabis growth. I did a little funny video with my mom and Earl Blumenauer for Chalice Farms and learned a lot from him. I hope that the VA will take another look at cannabis as a reasonable treatment for vets. I hope that the government will make banking accessible to the cannabis industry. And I think, I think this will legitimize in a lot of people's minds this as a constant, as something going forward that is advantageous to the states, that is helpful in terms of anxiety. I think you're right. I think there's a good chance that we will come out of this with cannabis, having a higher profile. I imagine there's plenty of people who, in their day-to-day life, would not even consider, even still, having marijuana. But if they've got a month of opening days stretched out in front of them, they're like, I got some time to recover. I'll dabble. I'll give it a try. So I imagine that we're making some customers too during this time.